We are changing gears this morning. We had a pretty, I guess you could call it an intense study of Daniel. And Lord willing, in 5 weeks, we'll start Revelation. So I thought maybe between the two, we'll take a little breather and study a few things that are worth looking at. And so that's what we're starting to do this morning. When you read the Bible, how do you figure out what you're supposed to do with what it tells you? That's what this morning's lesson is about. How many of you have heard the terms, or if you want to call it a phrase, aha, it flew away. I'll get it on. Command, example, and necessary inference. Have you ever heard those terms? Okay, I'm seeing head shaking. That's good. To some degree, there's been some controversy about these terms, but I don't think there should be, because when we read the scriptures, we see this is how we're supposed to understand things, because this is how Jesus taught, it's how the apostles taught, it's how all teaching is done. And the first two are pretty obvious. What's a command? Well, that's when Jesus says, do this. Or God says, do this, or don't do that. Those are obvious commands. They're clear. There's no question. Generally, there's no question. How about examples? And you have to take a little bit of care with examples. Sometimes an example is something that's approved and we're supposed to do it. Other times an example is something we're not supposed to do. Who was it that said? Some brilliant lady in the past said, you'll either have to be a good example or a horrible warning. I thought that was pretty good. And all a horrible warning is a bad example. For example, what did Peter do when he realized he had betrayed his Lord, just like Jesus had said? He wept bitterly. What did Judas do? He hung himself. Which would be a decent example to follow? Well, Peter's heart was broken, and he wept out of his broken heart, I'm sure, his personal sense of, it doesn't say, does it? You just have to kind of read between the lines a little bit. But the bottom line is, examples are things worthy of looking at, and some of them we call binding, in the sense that we can see, all right, this is given us as an example, so we're supposed to do it. But what's an inference? Inferences are what we are looking at this morning. If you see the first line at the top of your worksheet, inference, and that's supposed to be a definition, I know it's good because it comes right off the internet. An inference is what would you put in that blank? Conclusion, yes. An inference is a conclusion. You see what's happening, you hear what's being said, and you think about it, and you come to a conclusion, oh, this is what they meant. That's what it is. It's a conclusion reached on the basis of evidence and reasoning. You look at the evidence and you reason it out. Are we supposed to use our minds when we read the Bible? And the answer to that is duh. Even when we've been wrong. What's the first thing almost that God says through Isaiah in chapter 1 of Isaiah, verse 18? God says to the Israelites who are unfaithful to him, come and let us reason together. Though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be white as wool. So reason, we're supposed to reason. And that's why Jesus taught the way he did. Next line, the fact that Jesus uses inferences infers that he wants us to blank through what he says, think through what he says and then make conclusions about what we should do. That's what he does over and over and over. But it's somewhat subtle. Unless you think in terms of specifically inferencing, you won't always pick up on this. But he just does it all the time. Let's take a look at some of these. And I pulled these all from Matthew just for simplicity's sake. Matthew chapter 6, 25 to 32. This is a familiar text. I say it's a familiar text. I don't know if it's familiar to you or not. Is that familiar to you? I would hope so, because it's so very practical and useful. But this is what it says. I'll start it and you see if you know where it's going. For this reason, I say to you, do not be worried about your life as to what you'll eat or what you'll drink, or for your body what you shall put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds. Why is he telling us to look at the birds? What's that? They don't worry, and they don't even work. And yet what does God do? He feeds them. So what are we supposed to do with this that Jesus said? He's talking about birds. Is he a bird watcher? No. He's a shepherd, and he's trying to guide his sheep. So what are we supposed to learn about birds? Well, we watch birds, and from what Jesus says, we infer, oh, God takes care of the birds. What will he do about me? He'll take care of me. That's the lesson Jesus wants us to get. That's why he used the birds. What else did he talk about besides birds? Flowers. Look at the flowers, he says. Tell me about flowers. Is Solomon dressed better than flowers? Why did he use Solomon as an example? Because he was the wealthiest king Israel had. And he explored every avenue of pleasure and wealth and riches and knowledge and wisdom. By the way, what did he conclude about all that? It's all empty. It's vanity. But even Solomon in all his glory was not dressed like a flower. And what's the inference Jesus is trying to get us to make? Same thing with the birds. If God will take care of the flowers and the birds, he'll take care of me. So that's a pretty simple one right there. Let's move on to chapter 7, 7 through 11. Oh, by the way, from birds and flowers, we should learn not to worry. Matthew 7, 7 through 11. And this one's interesting because he tells it like it is, and it's not very complimentary. Starts out saying, ask and it'll be given to you, seek and you'll find, knock and it'll be open to you. And then the reason you ask, seek, and knock is to get something from God. You need something from God, so you're doing that. And he talks about, in verse 11, if you then being evil know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who's in heaven give what's good to those who ask him? So, blank fathers. What kind of fathers? Evil fathers. What's he mean when he says evil fathers? When the young man came to Jesus and called him good master, what did Jesus say? How did he respond? Call no man good. There's only one who's good, and that's God. And then figure out, oh, Jesus is God. So he was good, but Jesus was making a point. And he's making a point here. Evil fathers, they provide for their children. What will blank do? What will God do? And the answer is, he'll provide. He will provide. That's the lesson we're to learn there. Matthew chapter 7, 24 to 27. This is the end of the Sermon on the Mount. And I don't know if you've ever thought about this the way we're looking at it here. Did you guys get worksheets? Were there any left? Okay, good. You got a white one. I didn't put enough blue paper in, and the last few were white, so they work just as well. Verse 24. Everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them may be compared to a wise man who built his house on the rock. And what happens to the house on the rock when the storms come? It stands. What happens if you build your house on the sand? Storms come, it'll collapse. Now, did Jesus say anywhere in this, I'm telling you, do what I just told you? He never said that. He just said, here are some teachings, 3 chapters worth in Matthew. By the way, maybe this is an insight that will be helpful. When I was in school, they said, one of your assignments is going to be to memorize the Sermon on the Mount. And I thought, I can't memorize this. That's 3 whole chapters. How do you memorize 3 chapters? A verse at a time. And guess what? I memorized the Sermon on the Mount. It wasn't that big of a deal. You just do it a little at a time. I'm telling you that because we should all understand it's not that difficult if we'll simply apply ourselves to get the Word of God in us in all kinds of wonderful ways. So, Matthew 7:24-27, if you want your house to stand in life's storms, you should build it on the what? Foundation of Jesus' teachings. That's the inference. He never says that in so many words. He just gives us the example. You build your house on a rock, it'll stand when the storms come. You build your house on the sand, it'll collapse when the storms come. That's what he says. But we infer that. Matthew chapter 8. I really like this one because it's a little bit different. Matthew 8, verse 5-13. Who'd like to read that? Anybody want to read? All right.
And when Jesus entered Capernaum, the centurion came to him, begging him, and saying, Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, terribly tormented. Jesus said to him, I will come and heal him. But the centurion replied, Lord, I am not worthy for you to come under my roof, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I also am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. And I say to this one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my slave, do this, and he does it. Now when Jesus heard this, he was amazed, and said to those who were following, truly I say to you, I have not found such great faith with anyone in Israel. And I say to you that many will come from east and west and recline at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the sons of the kingdom will be thrown out into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And Jesus said to the centurion, go, it shall be done for you as you have believed. And the servant was healed at that very moment.
What do you think of that? Who had been talking to this centurion? What had he seen? What had he heard? We have no idea. But what has he done? He has come in faith for some reason. Whatever he's seen, whatever he's heard, something provoked him to reason about Jesus that this guy can do this. And so he goes to him. But that Jesus can do it is not the only thing this guy has reasoned out. What else has he reasoned out? Which is obvious by what he says. You're above me. I'm not worthy for you to come into my house. And in a display that gospel writer said Jesus marveled at, think about that, making God marvel. He said, I've got men that'll go and do what I tell them to do. I know it's the same for you. And he didn't go into some big theological, spiritual realm thing. He just said, I know you've got the power to do this. I see my power. That's what he was doing. He was thinking about his power. I can do this. But there's a line that I can't cross. And this guy owns that line. And so he goes to him and he says, I'm not worthy for you to come to my roof, but if you'll say the word, my servant will be healed. And what did Jesus say about that? I haven't seen this kind of faith anywhere. How did the guy get that faith? He got that faith by inferring. He heard about Jesus. He saw Jesus, something about his knowledge of Jesus. He reasoned through that, and he came to a conclusion, as his conclusion was perfectly accurate. So accurate that Jesus says, not even in Israel have I found anybody who will make the inferences this guy does. Now, did Jesus say inferences? He didn't, but that's what he's done. And that's what we need to do. We need to study, read, think about it. Okay, what's that mean for me to do? Think about it. If anybody want to volunteer, the hardest teaching you know of among all the things that Jesus said, what's the most difficult one? Or what do you think is for everybody else in here but you, maybe? Billy? Forgive others that you may be forgiven. Is that a challenge? Paul's got one better than that, apparently. What's that? Loving your enemies. All right. But good Christians shouldn't have enemies, right? Oh, you're laughing. I know why. Forgiving people. Loving your enemies. Excellent. Anything else? Yes. Respecting your leaders. Yes. Especially, I don't know if you're talking about in the church or in the government. Yeah. Well, it's obvious you honor the ones in the church, yeah, but yeah, that's a challenge. And I catch myself, and I better not go any farther with that because I seek self-justification. But what are you supposed to do with these kinds of things? These challenge our faith. It's like that's what he said. I'm not misunderstanding what he said, but how do I do that? What am I supposed to do with it? Marilyn? How'd you learn that? The hard way. You thought about this stuff, I'm sure, and you did like all the rest of us have done. You read it, you go, Lord, I know that's what you said, but man, really? Let me look. There's got to be another passage that'll let me out of this. There's got to be a loophole somewhere, and you've already looked. There's not. And so,
it's not just one time.
right.
It's every time.
Well, 490. 491st. Hey, yeah. That.
To be able to forgive them.
I'm sorry.
When God allows your heart to open up and forgive them.
Right.
Through your prayer and it's the most wonderful feeling because they don't deserve it.
Was it Corrie ten Boom? I don't know if you've ever heard of Corrie ten Boom, but I think she's the one who said to forgive is to release a prisoner from their bonds and then discover that the prisoner was you. That's pretty profound. But it's like what Jesus said. When I forgive others, I'm not releasing them from God's judgment. Just because I forgive somebody doesn't mean God's going to forgive them. He's still going to hold us accountable in all the proper ways he should. But when I forgive them and I realize that doesn't release them from judgment, it releases me from judgment. Because what did Jesus say? You'll be forgiven as you forgive others. That's the model prayer, we call it, or the Lord's Prayer, some call it. That's the only part of that prayer that Jesus came back and made commentary on about the forgiveness part. Yeah, that's a challenge. Paul?
Releasing them from anything, because probably one of the hardest things to do is to forgive someone, especially inside the church, that isn't even asking for your forgiveness.
Right.
They don't even see it your way. They don't see it. They don't think they're wrong, so they're not being held by anything. But you're holding yourself because you still have that against them.
Right. And you don't have to mention any names, but has anybody ever approached you and said, you really hurt my feelings when you did that or said that, and you had no clue? And it's like, what? And it's usually some kind of a misunderstanding, but that happens. Carrie?
I remember when we studied Luke, we had the same situation happen with the centurion.
Right.
But, there's some differences between it, because, Luke, the centurion didn't talk face to face with Jesus. He sent the Jewish leaders came and said, there's this wonderful guy, who built our synagogue. And then, so he never actually, I've always found it interesting, that's an extremely different scenario. However, the things that are the same is the fact that he said, I'm not worthy to be able to, come, and then, but if you just say the word, it'll happen. So that, and then Jesus saying, this is great faith. So those things are the same in both. So the faith, I noticed, was accompanied by humility. So I'm wondering if that's kind of what Jesus marveled at. Of course, his faith, but there was great humility. I'm not even worthy for you to be near me or
Right.
be in my home. So that humility is I think it's the same in both tellings. So.
And there's something about that I think I'm seeing more and more and more, or realizing more and more and more. Faith and humility, there are some aspects of godliness, the fruit of the Spirit, you try to separate them out. You can't really separate them out. They all go hand in hand. You can't come to faith without a certain degree of humility. What all humility is, well, what is humility? Humility is seeing yourself as you really are, your actual self. Humility is not, I'm no good, I'm worthless. No, that's dumb. Don't say those kinds of things. You are a worthy person in God's eyes of his grace and his mercy in that sense. But humility is just when you see yourself as you actually are. And you don't act any better than that. And really, you don't act any less than that.
If you really are having faith that the Lord will be faithful to you to provide, then you do have to take yourself out.
Right.
So, maybe it's possibly you have great faith without removing yourself and your will, your pride. I don't know. So, maybe one really can't be great faith without it.
Do you ever get something maybe when you're putting something together for your kids at Christmas or your grandkids, but whatever it is, you buy this thing and it comes in pieces and you get instructions on how to put it together. Okay, some of you think you know where this is going. Is there anything personal about those instructions? Not a thing. Whoever wrote them doesn't know you, and they doesn't know why you bought this product. They don't know where you live. They just wrote them because these are just facts about what you do with what you've got in this package to get it together into a useful thing, whatever it is. That's all that is. So you would never think to put yourself in those instructions and say, this guy just hates me. He didn't want me to put this thing together. He wanted me to be confused. He didn't want me to use a power tool because he knew that would make it go faster. I thought I'd get a lot of laughs from the guys on that because almost everything says, don't use any power tools. Well, that's an instruction for stupid people. So I'm already taking it personal, aren't I? But that's the thing about the Bible. When you come to the scriptures, you read this about this centurion and pull yourself out of it. Just read it objectively to say, what am I supposed to learn from this? Wow, I can learn that you can see things about Jesus that convince you he's the Son of God, and you go with that, and you're rewarded. That's what this is about. Who's not going to get that reward? Ironically enough, Jesus talked about him. Verse 11. I say to you that many will come from the east and west and recline at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the sons of the kingdom will be cast out into the outer darkness. Who's he talking about in verse 11? Many will come from the east and west. What word would you use in this context? Gentiles. Yeah, Samaritans, Gentiles, people that you would think would be the outcasts among the Jewish folks. But then he says, the sons of the kingdom, who would they be? Well, the Jewish people. Going to be cast out. Why? Because they didn't make the inferences about Jesus they needed to. They didn't look and say, wow, this guy is raising people from the dead. He's giving sight back to the blind. He's healing sick people and lame people and taking leprosy away. And he teaches things. That's the real thing right there. What he teaches is powerful. It's not like the scribes and the Pharisees teach. And it's useful. It's helpful for me. It shows me something of who I am and how I need to change to be more holy, to be more God. Everything about Jesus pointed us in this direction. And what did they want to do with him? He came to his own, and his own received him not. Now, this is not a blanket statement about all Jewish people, but that's the irony. And I wonder if, to some degree, God did it this way so that we could see that he really is the Son of God. Because when you go back and you read all the prophecies that talk about Jesus coming, they talk about his rejection. Now, if they were making it up on the fly, why would they make up a Messiah that the people are going to reject? Make up a Messiah who's going to be abused and mistreated. You wouldn't do that. And if you're making it up as one of the people who's writing a gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, why would you write things in there that make you out to be such a goober? Such a lunkhead. You wouldn't do that. You would write this in such a way, if you were making it up, made you look good. Oh, yeah, I was there, and I tried to defend Jesus. And no, it's not the way it was written, because that's not the way it happened. We see all that stuff. What should we be doing with it? We make inferences. Oh, it must be true. It must be real. And besides, look at all these witnesses. What other ancient document has the kind of, I'll use the word attestation. What does attestation mean? It means proof it's real. Over 5,000 manuscripts of the New Testament alone. And then when the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, that showed, well, everything we've got in the Old Testament is accurate. It's not been changed. And that's what you hear over and over and over again. Bible's been rewritten so many times, there's no way to know that what's in there is the truth. Those people have no clue. They are parroting what someone else has said. What does a parrot do? He just repeats what he hears. And that's what a lot of people do. Don't ever be intimidated by somebody who says, the Bible's been rewritten so many times, because I'm saying this in the nicest way possible. They simply do not know what they are talking about. Preston.
Just listening, and just kind of a couple of observations. I used to think when someone inferred something, they say, he inferred. In other words, he suggested. But then your definition of inference is to conclude. So I'm thinking about this. I looked it up and went to the internet. And then I get to thinking about creation. It happened. We weren't there, and then we were there, and God is in human form. He wasn't there, and then he's there. Then I think about how when Jesus asked you, who do you people say that I am? And he answers, and then he gets the question, or he answers the question and says, God's revealed it. So you get to thinking about what's being revealed, and then I think about Revelation. This is just being revealed, written down later after the fact by the Holy Spirit to bring it to our memory. So the centurion has seen, possibly, or heard all the things. And he knows that there's power there, and that he's not worthy. And then I try to put myself in the position of looking at it through a Jewish, Israelite standpoint, and that they couldn't approach God unless it was through the high priest. There was kind of a veil. There was a veil. But all of a sudden, there's your Creator we can approach. There's so many things going on, it's hard to understand. And then you're talking about this guy's faith and how to look at and to learn from. It's very interesting.
Well, I think it is, and I don't mean to misjudge anybody about why they didn't have faith in Jesus. But here's one thing I'm convinced of, and that is that nobody through history had good reason to doubt God. I'm not saying they couldn't find some reasons, but nobody had good reason to doubt God. God always presents himself and provides evidence. If you want to believe, it's there. What does Hebrews 6 say? Lord willing, we'll talk about this briefly in the sermon. Hebrews 11:6. Yes.
Believing that he is, and he's a rewarder of those who diligently seek him.
Must believe that he is and is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. And see, I'm coming back to Acts 17, Paul on Mars Hill. That just seems so apropos, where he talked about groping after God. He's up on Mars Hill. There's all these monuments, shrines, if you will, to the gods. And there's one monument to the unknown God. And he says, that's the one I want to talk to you about. He said, he doesn't need these temples. He's not served with men's hands as if he needed anything. And then he talked about groping after God. What's groping mean? You're searching. You got your hand down in your pocket. I know those keys are in there somewhere, but I also have a Kleenex and a pocket knife and a flashlight. And you're just kind of groping until you finally find something that, oh, those are my keys. That's groping. So that's what we do. And we're expected to grope and make inferences. And what did Paul write in Romans chapter 1 about lack of faith in God? He said, if you're an atheist, you have no excuse. Why? Well, go to Romans 1 and take a look at. I know we got a lot of stuff to cover in Matthew, and I'm not doing it. I'm piddling. But we're talking about these inferences, and they're just all over the place if you just start looking for them. Paul says this in Romans 1:18, the wrath of God's revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Think about that in our present political situation. Suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Any of that going on? This is 2,000 years old. It's so irrelevant. It's not up to date anymore. And then he says in verse 19, because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. What's he say? God made it evident. God made it evident. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what? Through what has been made. And you know it as well as I do. You look at the world, and the more you understand the world, the less you're likely to say, there can't be a God. The more you understand of the way things work in the physical creation, the more you're compelled to say, somebody made this. And it's not just the creation, it's you as part of the creation. You hold a baby in your arms. And what happens to you? You just get all mushy. And the older you get, the worse it gets. I'm warning you. And it doesn't even have to be a human baby. A kitty cat. A little kitten. Oh, it's a kitten. A puppy. Something happens inside you. We're just made to respond with that kind of emotion. Why don't we just naturally want to kill everything? Because if evolution were true, wouldn't that be the way we would think? Everything is a potential threat to my existence. I must kill it. Survival of the fittest, survival of the strongest, survival of the fastest, survival of the one who caught the other one unaware. Do unto others before they do it to you. That's the way of the world. That's the way of evolution. But then you go back to Genesis 1, and God writes into Genesis 1 a counter to evolution. He says everything reproduces how? After its own kind. What are we supposed to infer from that? Oh, things didn't change from one species into another. You see, there's just a possibility for inferences all over the place. And God didn't come out and say in Genesis 1, nothing changed from one species into another. He didn't say that. He just said everything reproduces after its kind. I read it and I go, oh, okay. By the way, what do you see in nature? You see everything reproducing after its kind. And there's no new information. There's no new genetic information. There's no new genetic information. If you want evolution to take place, you've got to have continual new genetic information. There is no new genetic information. Everything's the same stuff. All right, pause for a second. Back to the worksheet. That's my fault. Where are we? I don't even know where we are. We did 8, 5 to 13. Here we go. Oh, this is a sermon for a couple of weeks ago, Matthew 8, 23 to 27. They're in the boat. Storm comes up. Where's Jesus? See, there's an inference. You're supposed to take naps. This is how I interpret that text right there.
Naps during sermons?
Naps, well, if it's a stormy sermon, naps are good. That's an example right there that we're supposed to follow. So, Matthew 8, 23 to 27. If you were here 2 weeks ago, you may remember talking about this, but the bottom line is, what did Jesus do when they woke him up and said, we're dying here? What did he say? Why are you afraid? Where is your faith? Oh, you have little faith. All these kinds of things he said to them. So, look at the worksheet. With Jesus in your boat, there is no need to be afraid, no need to worry. That's the message. That's what he's trying to get us to see. Why were you afraid? Why would you ask that question if there wasn't a reason not to be afraid? Of course, that was just Jesus and the apostles. That doesn't apply to us, of course, right? We can think like that sometimes and we'd be wrong. Why did he put that in the scriptures? Why did the Holy Spirit say, hey, Matthew, write that down? Hey, Luke, write that down. Hey, Mark, you write that down too. I want everybody who reads one of these Gospels to read what happened, what Jesus said. Matthew 9, 10 to 13. This is a good one, like the others aren't. Matthew 9:10. Then it happened as Jesus was reclining at the table in the house, behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and were dining with Jesus and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, why is your teacher eating with the tax collectors and sinners? What is that? That's a question. Could that have been a legitimate question? It could have. It could have. If you're coming in and you're thinking with humility, hey, this guy claims to be the Messiah, and he's eating with people that, in my frame of reference, you shouldn't be eating with if you're a holy person. What's this all about? What can I learn from this? And so if you ask the question, hey, your rabbi is eating with tax collectors and sinners, can you explain that to me? That's a completely different approach. Yes?
He's not a respecter of person. He's a man who loves all mankind.
Yes, loves everybody. But he doesn't take any guff either, especially when our guff is likely to lead somebody else astray, which we'll talk about that later too. And that bell's out of place. We don't need any bells in here. Verse 12, when Jesus heard this, he said, it is not those who are healthy who need a physician, but those who are sick. And then he says, what's he say in verse 13? Go learn what this means. Here's your homework assignment. Go read this passage from Hosea. I desire compassion and not sacrifice. So if you're one of those guys, what are you supposed to do? You got your assignment. Oh, okay, go think about what Hosea said. And when I think about what Hosea said, what am I supposed to do? Supposed to come to a conclusion about what Hosea said. And what would the conclusion be? That's what Jesus was doing. He was following through with what Hosea said. Oh, man, I'm supposed to be a teacher of the law. I'm supposed to be one who's a leader of Israel, but I didn't even figure out that that's what Hosea said. And he tells me to go and study that, and then to do what? To make an inference. To do your research, to look at the evidence, and then draw a conclusion. You can't do anything without a conclusion. You have to conclude something. Have you ever concluded something that was wrong? Oh yeah, sure, all the time. Some of my best lessons in life have been from making conclusions that were wrong. But that brings us back to the humility. If you're humble and you realize you're wrong, what do? You change. Oh, I was mistaken. It's like, I'm Marty Kessler. I can't be wrong. I just looking at it the wrong way, that's all. Well, wait a minute. If I'm looking at it the wrong way, then I guess I can be wrong. See how silly you can look if you don't admit, yeah, I might need to make some corrections here. Preston?
I love what you just said. I love what we're learning. It made me think of the statement that I made to a kid with his uncle standing there, and I said, learn him something. Someone else is standing there and said, no, teach. I said, no. If you teach someone something, they may not learn it. But when they learn it, like you said, they come to a conclusion.
Right. Well, and when you study, see if this is true for you like it's true to me. I've had people tell me things about the Bible, and I really appreciate that because there are things I need to be told about the Bible or about what it says. But when I'm reading it myself and I discover something I hadn't seen before, which is more valuable to you? What you discover is more valuable. To me, I can't answer for you, obviously, but when I discover it, it's like, wow, that's been there all this time. You ever say that to yourself? How's that been there all that time and I've never seen that before? And now you see it and you go, that's really neat. Now, the only way that can happen is if you're making an inference, because if God had just said it outright, boom, there it is. You don't read Genesis 1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and you go, oh, I never read it like that before. Well, how else can you read that? But it's the other things. When Jesus says, go read Hosea, figure out what that means. Oh, okay. So you're telling me to think, telling me to read what God says and to think about it and come to a conclusion. That's exactly what he's telling folks to do.
School that we are. Even though we learn it, will we keep it? Will it grow? So we have to cultivate that school, and to me that's staying in God's Word and keeping a soft heart and humble through humility. And
Right.
study what we've been told and to work out our own salvation with fear and trembling.
Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. In other words, it's on you. It's not a burden. It's a great, I hate to use this word because it just seems so trite now, but it really is a journey with God. You're going through life with God, and he's helping you figure things out. And I don't know if you've noticed this about Jesus. He didn't always tell people things right up front. He just kind of asked questions and let people think about it. You come to your own conclusion. Remember when they were out in the countryside and there were all these people that had been following him and they hadn't had anything to eat? And he said, hey, why don't you guys give him something to eat? Did he know what he was about to do? Of course he knew. But why did he ask that question? He asks questions like that of us all the time. He puts things in front of us. What's this? What are you going to do with this, Marty? Oh, I got to figure that out, don't I? Yeah, you got to figure it out. So,
why did Jesus talk in parables?
boom. Is every parable not an inference? Here, read this parables. Hear this. Draw your own conclusion about what it means. It's like, yeah, that's chapter 13. We didn't get to it, but hey. Anyway, why did we get, you guys just talk too much. Sorry about that. Lord willing, we can come back to this or something else next week, but I think you got the idea about inferences. Any questions, any observations? Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.